Hi, thank you so much for taking this course. What is this course about? Well, this course will teach you how to use string functions in Microsoft Excel to enable you to do the following. Extract characters from a string, get the length of a string, find text within a string cell, trim text of excess spaces, and much more. Knowing these string functions and how to use them in Microsoft Excel will give you the confidence you need to manipulate your own strings in your own Excel spreadsheets. For example, when you're cleaning data. Now, this is a beginners to intermediate course. It is aimed at users who want to know how to use some of the popular string functions in Excel. It assumes that users have a working knowledge of Microsoft Excel. Aim of the course. Well, the aim of this course is to enable you to grasp the concepts of commonly used string functions in Excel. Once you've completed this course, then it should give you the confidence you need to go and apply what has been taught into your own work. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or queries. I really want you to get the best out of this course. And remember, Excel is a very popular tool, and so knowing how string functions work in it and when to use them is essential. Best ways to learn from this course. Well, the first thing you need to do is to watch the lectures. They will show you each concept along with examples. Secondly, rewatch the lectures if it's necessary to fully grasp the concepts. Ask questions to me via the discussion forums or message me personally. Download the workbooks so that you can also have an offline copy. Last but not least, apply what has been taught to your own workbooks. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this course. Hi, in this lecture we're going to cover the len function. Now the len function basically returns the length of a string, and it takes one parameter, which is the string or text itself. So just to look at our example, here we've got the word apples. Now if I wanted to find out the length of the string, I would basically write equals len, brackets, and I would reference cell B12 and close brackets, and that gives us 6. So just to count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. Now, one of the benefits of len is that it can also be used to find hidden spaces. So for example, here, I've got the same word, apples and apples, and I've run the len function, and I've got a result of 6 and 7. Now we know from our prior example that the answer should be 6. So why have we got 7? Okay, well, just to demonstrate this, if I double click into this cell first, if you look at the cursor, it ends immediately after S. Now, if I double click into this cell, if you look at the cursor, you can see that there's a small gap where the cursor finishes between that and the S. And if I just use my keyboard, I can highlight this gap. Now that is a space. Now it's this space which gets included as part of the length of a string. So that's a real good handy thing to know, folks, because if you have ever had a string which is not behaving according to your formulas, a good test is to duplicate that string and then run len on both those strings and see if the lengths are the same. If it is not, then most likely you have hidden spaces somewhere. Now, typical scenarios where you can use the len function are when, for example, you're migrating data from, say, system A to system B, and system B will only accept a string length of a certain number of characters. Now, what would happen is if you tried to import that data and it didn't match the rule, the import would fail. So what you could do prior is basically dump all your data in a spreadsheet, then use the len function, and in combination with that you could use conditional formatting or if true false statements, and you can find out which ones are breaking the rule. So for example, here I've got apples, oranges, pears and blackberries. Now I wish to flag up any strings which are 8 characters or more. So I've got this formula here which I use to figure this out. So basically I would write if brackets len and the cell we're after is less than or equal to 7, because remember we're looking for any string which are 8 characters or more. So we are basically saying here test for any strings which are less than or equal to 7, and if we get a string which is less than or equal to 7 characters, bring back a true, otherwise bring back a false. And it's these falses which we know will be breaking our system migration rules. So as you can see here, we've got a true and a true. So both these two words are less than or equal to 7 characters. But here, pears and blackberries, we get a false for both. Now blackberries we can pretty much determine that's over 8 characters or more. Now pears, well, it's only 5 characters, so really that should have been a true. So how come we didn't get that? Well, let's go into our pear cell and see why. So, if I go inside, now as you can see the cursor is very far away from the S. So this indicates that we've got hidden spaces. Now, ordinarily, if we were just looking at a sheet, we would not have been able to spot that. But because of the len function and the combination of if true false statements, we can basically isolate these hidden spaces now from using this formula. And if we add a filter, we could basically say, give me everything that's false, and it would only give back our false entries. We could then go into those strings and manually correct them. Okay, so that concludes this lecture. We have covered the len function, and we have also looked at typical uses it can be used for, which is data validation. Thank you for listening and watching. Hi, in this lecture I'm going to cover the find function. Now the find function basically finds a specified text string within another text string and returns the position of the starting point of that text string. Now the find function is case sensitive. Just to look at the parameters it takes, the first parameter is the actual text we want Excel to search for. The second parameter is the cell which we want to search within. And the third parameter, which is optional, is the starting position of where you want find to start from in that text cell. Now if you leave this blank, it will just start from the beginning. Another thing to note is if the find function does not return a match, in other words, if it cannot find what you're looking for, it will return an error message. Now, if you combine the fact that it can return an error message if it cannot find the value you are looking for, if you combine this with the isError function and if statements, you can use it to perform some specific find and then subsequent action. Now the isError function basically takes one parameter, and that is the cell you're testing, and it basically tests to see whether an error message is returned. So whatever you evaluate, it will determine if it returns an error message or not, and if it does, then it will return a true, otherwise it will return a false. Okay, so let's just take a look at some examples. So in the first example, I've got the word Metroplex. Now I want to find if it contains the letters TRO within this word here. So using the find function, I would write equals find brackets double quote TRO, so that's the text we want to search for, comma B19, this is where we want the search to take place, and comma 1, in other words start from position 1. And this returns 3, which is the starting point of our TRO, which is here. So 1, 2, 3. In the next example, I've got apples. Now I want to find if it contains the letters ORA. So I would write equals find brackets double quotes ORA double quotes comma B21 comma 1. So in other words, search in this string here for the letters ORA. Now they're not there, so the find function returns an error message. So it's this error message which we're going to capitalize on using the isError function and write some more complicated statements, but more useful statements as well. So for example here we've got 4 names. Now let's just say we wanted to find out for each of these names which one of them contains the word Smith. Now obviously we just got 4 names here, but if you imagined a list with a couple of thousand names, then you can see how handy this would be. So in combination with isError and if statements, we are using the find function to basically write a formula which will enable us to find out if the word Smith is in any of these cells, and if it's not, what to do as well. So, going into our if statement, now this may look complicated, but it's really not. Basically, our test bit is here. So, just taking the inside brackets first, we're basically saying find the text Smith within the text in B27, starting from position 1. Now if we jump out of bracket, our isError only takes one value. So whatever the result of this find statement, it will evaluate. If it gets an error message back, it will come back as true in terms of the logical test for the if statement. Now, if it does come back as true, then basically we haven't found a Smith in our searched text cell. So the true part of the statement will return back no Smith found. Now, if this isError statement evaluates to false, that means that we have got a value back which contains the word Smith. And in that case, this part here will just return back Smith found. So, as you can see here, we got Smith found, which meant find actually did return Smith and the starting position. And so this statement evaluated to false, so we got the word Smith found returned. Now here, Smith wasn't found. So we did get an error message back, and this part of the statement executed, no Smith found. Similarly to here as well. So that's one way you can use the find function to build logical statements and get some sort of meaningful results from them. Now, another use for the find function is that if you combine it again with if statements and the isError function, as well as a function called substitute, then you can use it to take out unwanted characters from your data sets. So for example, I've got two names here. Now let's just say I wanted to get rid of these percentage symbols. So using this formula here, I can do that. So basically it's similar to the formula we had before. So what I'm saying is find the percentage symbol in cell B34. Now if I don't find it, then I will get an error message. In other words, if the percentage symbol is not there, then this statement here will evaluate to true. In which case I've said just return the cell back, because that means we'll have a clean cell. However, if we do find the percentage symbol, then what I've told Excel to do here, and this is using the substitute function, is to basically look into this cell and replace this percentage symbol with basically nothing. In other words, it will just eliminate it, and the result will be outputted again, but without the percentage symbols. So just to quickly look into this substitute function, right, it basically just says substitute text. So in other words, the text we want to work in, and it's got old text, which is our percentage symbol. So that's what we're looking for, and we're looking to get replaced. And we're saying replace the old text with new text. And then we close the brackets. And so that's how we get John Smith without the percentage symbols. As you can see, it's removed them. Now, similarly, here we have Mark Dwayne. Now, there's no percentage symbols, and we still get the name returned because with the error message evaluating to true, we asked Excel here to basically return back B34 because we know that that's okay still to return. So this formula is written in either way, that even if you do have percentage symbols or you don't, you'll still get a proper clean name back. Okay, so that concludes this lecture. We have covered the find function, and we have also seen how it can be used in conjunction with other functions to clean data. Thank you for listening and watching. Hi, in this lecture I'm going to cover the mid function. The mid function basically returns a substring from a string given a start position and the number of characters, in other words the length. It takes three parameters. The first parameter is text, in other words the text we want to extract our string from. The second parameter is the start position, and the third parameter is the number of characters, in other words the length. So I've got a couple of examples just to show you what we can use the mid function for. Okay, so let's look at our example. Right, so I've got this cell here, which has basically a person called Jim Parker and his address. Now it's all in one cell. Now, a common task in Excel is basically extracting certain parts of a string into a different cell. For whatever reason, you could have a new system which is outputted data all in one cell, in which case it's not desirable because you can't do much with it. So using the mid function in combination with the function called find, you can actually extract certain parts of a string. Now, I've already covered the find function in a previous lecture, so I'm going on the onus that you have some working knowledge of it. Okay, so let's look at our formula in a bit more detail. Now, this may look complicated, folks, but it's really not once you break it down. So just to see the results of this formula, as you can see, it successfully extracted just the address part. So how did we get this? Right, well, we can see here we've got our mid function, followed by a find function, followed by another find function. So starting with the innermost function, let's take a look. Right, so this function here is basically saying find a space in cell B16 and return the position of that space. Now, why are we looking for spaces? Well, we want to extract just the address part. So we need some sort of marker to tell us where the address part starts. Now, a good way to do this is to use spaces, because we know that each line will have the first name and surname of a person, followed by the address. We know that there'll be a space here and a space here. So basically we want to return everything after the second space. So we first have to work out where the first space is. So this is what this part of the function does. Now, the result of this will act as a result for our third parameter on our second find function. So our second find function is basically saying find a space in cell B16, but the key thing here is that the position will start after the first space because we're plussing 1 here. So in other words, the second find function will start here and go along looking for the next space, and then it will return the position of that space, which is what we want to basically carry out our extraction part. So that's what this bit will do here. Now, once we've got the position of our second space, we basically want to return everything after that. So that's what this +1 bit does here. So basically it will go along, it will return this position, the second find function. Then the result of that acts as a parameter for our mid function, more specifically the second parameter, which is the start number. And we're plussing 1, so we will basically get the position where this 4 is here. Then the (50) part is basically just ensuring that we get everything after, because some addresses can be, fairly long and some can be fairly short. So that's it, folks. That's how we use the mid function in combination with the find function to extract an address part of a cell. Now, just to give a bit more clarity, I'm going to click here and then click Evaluate Formula just to show you how Excel works this out. So I go Evaluate, keep clicking, and what it's doing is basically evaluating the inner cells first. So the result here was 4, which was here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the position of our first space. Now we've got 5, so the second find function has kicked in, and it's basically saying find a space in that cell and start at position 5. So in other words, where the P is. Now it's found that space, the second one, at position 11. But remember, we want to return everything after that space. So this is where our second +1 bit here comes in, which is there. We then go evaluate again, and as you can see, the function it's basically saying mid, this cell here, position 12, in other words, start at position 12, and return the next 50 characters, which would be our address. Okay, so in this example, I've got a combination of letters and numbers here. Now I want to extract everything after the letters RGB, regardless of where RGB is positioned in each line. So here you can see it starts at the beginning, and here too, but here it's in the middle. So we need to write our mid function to basically take this into account. Now again, the mid function is quite useful when you combine it with the find function. So I've written the formula here. Let's take a look at it. Okay, so starting from the inner bit first, we're basically saying find RGB in cell B30 starting at position 1. So this will return the position of R. We're then saying +3 to that, and using that as our second parameter to the mid function, which is the start position here. And again, in terms of the length, we're just saying 50, just to make sure we get everything back. And that's how we do it. So as you can see, we get the numbers back here. And in this case, because RGB is in the middle, we get 25535, just the short number bit back, and we don't get the first bit. So this is how we use the mid function, folks. It's a very powerful function, and what I suggest is you basically practice with it. Practice with it in combination with using the find function, and you will see just how useful this can be. Okay, so that concludes this lecture. We have covered the mid function. We've also seen how we can use this function in combination with the find function to clean data. One other thing to note, folks, is that there are other ways you can clean this data which can get you the same result. For example, you can use VBA. However, this method is still a popular way since it's fairly quick to write and carry out. Thank you for listening and watching. Hi, in this lecture we're going to cover the concatenate function. Now this function basically enables you to join several text strings together into one string. Now the parameter it takes are basically each individual text string. So text 1, text 2, text 3, and so forth. Let's look at some example ways we can use this function. So we've got here apples and oranges in 3 separate cells. Now if I wanted to join these 3 words into one string, I would use the concatenate function, and I would basically write equals concatenate brackets B13 comma double quote space double quote comma C13 comma double quote space double quote comma D13, then close the bracket, and that would give me this, apples and oranges. Now you might be tempted to think, why do we need this double quote space double quote? Can't we just put equals concatenate brackets B13 comma C13 comma D13 close bracket? Well, this function literally will join the strings together. So if there's no spaces in those initial text strings, it won't output with a space. It will literally just join it up like we've got here. Now this wouldn't be a desirable result. So you need to put in those double quotes space double quotes if you've got a sentence that you actually want to be legible. Okay, so let's look at another example. Here we've got the number 50. Now we can use the concatenate function to join strings that aren't necessarily in cells. So here I've got equals concatenate brackets B21, which is here, comma, then I've got double quote, then a little space, and then I've got apples were picked today, double quote, and then I've closed the bracket. And this gives us this sentence here, 50 apples were picked today. Now, a more advanced use of the concatenate function is to basically use it to carry out basic Excel report automation. For example, here, I've got a very small table just of Peter and John and their sales figures. Now we want a formula that will basically say if the sales figures were less than 50, there's no bonus, otherwise you get a bonus. So I've written a formula here. If brackets B25 is less than 50, so in other words, this number here, then if it's a true, then we output there is no bonus. Otherwise, if it's a false, then we use the concatenate function and we basically say A25, which is here, Peter, comma, double quote, space, has been awarded a, space, double quotes, comma, B25, which is here, and then comma, double quote, space, dollar bonus, double quote, and then we close the brackets. So according to this formula here, Peter, who has sales less than 50, won't receive a bonus. So the text that's output is there is no bonus. However, John has hit 50. So the formula outputs John has been awarded a $50 bonus. So as you can see, you can use this concatenate function in conjunction with if statements and build some sort of basic automation in your reports. And this wouldn't need any updating sans your original data tables. So that concludes this lecture. We have covered the concatenate function and we have given some examples of its uses for basic report automation. That concludes this lecture. Thank you for listening and watching. Hi, in this lecture I'm going to cover the trim function. Now the trim function is used to remove all excess spaces from strings except for the single spaces between the words of that string. Now the trim function is often used as part of data cleaning in conjunction with other string functions. It takes one parameter and that's the string itself which you want to trim. I've got a couple of examples. Let's take a look. Okay, so in this example, I've got the sentence, "Hi, how are you?" Now, it might not be overly obvious, but between the hi and the how, we've got a double space. So if we use the trim function, we would write equals trim brackets B15. And the function will take out the excess space, in other words, that second space there. So we've got two spaces. The trim function will take out the excess space to give us our sentence with that excess space removed, but with the single spaces between the words still there. The next example we have is 34 Iacon Avenue. Now if I just go into this cell, you can see that we've got some trailing spaces here. Now to get rid of them, again, we can use our trim function. So equals trim brackets B18. And as you can see, the trim function basically eliminates those leading spaces while still maintaining the spaces between our words. Now, as mentioned earlier, the trim function is often used as part of data cleaning. Now, one of the most common scenarios you can have in Excel spreadsheets when you've got data is that two words may look the same, but if you actually compare them, they won't match. Now, this is normally due to hidden spaces. So for example, here I've got the word hello, and here I've got the word hello. Now I've written a formula which basically says if cell B21 is equal to B22, and if it's true, then the cells match, otherwise the cells do not match. In other words, it's not true. Now as you can see, our result has outputted cells do not match. Why is this? Well, it's because we have a hidden space. So if I click into here, that doesn't have any hidden spaces. Now if I go into this cell, can you see it? We have a hidden space there. Now if you didn't write this formula, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But now that we know we've got a hidden space, what can we do about it? Well, one thing people often do is they basically run their set of data through the trim function. So if I typed equals trim brackets, selected this cell, Control plus C, In other words, copy this cell, then go back to this cell, right click and paste as values. You can see our formula has changed to cells match because now this cell is equal to that cell. So I hope you can see how we've used the trim function to basically clean some data. Now, more complicated data cleaning would involve using this function in conjunction with perhaps the len function and the substitute function to take out unwanted characters. And in fact, if we actually just undo what we did, and if I just did a len to find out the amount of characters, that would show up as 5. And if I did len again, that would show up as 6 because it's including the space. So that's how we use trim to form one tool of data cleaning amongst a lot of other string functions as well. Okay, so that concludes this lecture. We have covered the trim function. Now this function, as we've seen, on its own is quite handy when it comes to data cleaning, and it can also be used in conjunction with other string functions to clean data as well. Thank you for listening and watching. Congratulations on completing this Excel course. You have learnt how to do operations such as trim text of excess spaces, find text in strings, and getting the length of a string, and much, much more. You have also learned that string functions on their own, while they are effective, it's often when they're combined together with different other string functions and if statements that they could be really used to powerfully clean Excel data. Now remember, any questions or queries you have on the lectures, please feel free to reach out. The best two ways are either through the discussion forums or the messaging system. Also, don't forget to keep practicing in Microsoft Excel. Cheers.